Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I am Clark Coffey, and with me, as always, is Mr. Cullen McFater. What's up, my dude?
Hello, it's McFater, Cullen McFater.
It's McFater, Cullen McFater.
Yes,
and
I'm in the running now, so...
If you couldn't tell from that little bitty hint, we're going to be covering, for the first time ever, a Bond film. And which one are we going to be talking about? On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is Cullen's pick. I was totally taken by surprise by this pick. I just never imagined that you'd pick a Bond film, A. And then out of all the Bond films there are, I was even more surprised that you picked this one. But I'm really happy you did. I'm not like the biggest Bond fan in the world, but I do like me some James Bond though, and it had been a really long time since I'd seen this one. And as we're going to go into more detail on, this one is is definitely unique out of all the Bond films there are. This is one of the
in a lot of ways, yeah.
In a lot of ways, this is like I would say maybe like the second most unique one, but the most unique one is not considered canon, but.
Which one would you consider the original Casino Royale?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
If you can't beat them, join them. If you're scared to fight it out, watch him and watch out. If you think your girl's a good looker, take a good look at this guy's dolls.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
The new Bond. The different 007 on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The new star. The different Bond. The name's Lazenby. George Lazenby, and he's got it made. The different Bond woman. The name's Rigg, Diana Rigg. This one's got class and style. Telly Savalas, Gabrielle Pizzetti, and 007 times more excitement. If you think you know your Bond, think again. This one's different.
It's true!
Drop everything. Try and make it. Marvelous is the password for the different Bond. The man says,
this never happened to the other fella.
Cullen, I'm curious. You picked the film. When was the first time you had seen the film? And kind of describe that for us and what you thought and how you came to it and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was really, really into James Bond as a kid.
Okay.
Now, first...
Was that because was your father, was that kind of like something your dad was into, or?
Neither of my parents, they knew, like, obviously it's not like it was an
everybody
hidden,
knows, yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember the first time I saw a James Bond movie was because I rented GoldenEye at Blockbuster. And I was probably like 5 or 6 and
and so you picked that out. You picked that out on your own?
Yeah, because I remember my mom, her only comment about it was just that I remember her saying that James Bond always drives very fast was her comment. And then that was actually the first movie I ever made was right after I watched GoldenEye and I took my like little tape high 8 camera and dragged it around the floor to pretend to be the James Bond car, and
I love
said little funny things in a British accent.
This would have been like 96 or so, right? Because like GoldenEye
this would have probably been like it was GoldenEye had been out for a while. It was probably like 2000. 3-ish, maybe.
Wait. So 2003
was it
was
2000?
the year that you first saw. So I always have to remind myself how young you are.
Yeah, well, I was born in 98, so yeah.
Yeah, I was like, so obviously you would have been unable to have seen GoldenEye in 96 when it would have maybe first plopped out onto Blockbuster or whatever.
Yeah.
So that clearly was impossible. but
No,
but,
yeah.
okay.
Brosnan was definitely my Bond as a kid.
That was your Bond?
Yeah, like still to this day, I know it's not a very highly regarded one, but my favorite Bond movie to just sit down and watch is Tomorrow Never Dies. I still love that one. And so Brosnan, yeah, definitely. I had all the
Now,
games
did you have the
on
Nintendo
GameCube
game?
Yeah.
Did you have the GoldenEye Nintendo game?
on 64, yeah. And then
Yeah,
I had
okay.
Nightfire on GameCube, and I loved James. Like, just was hugely into him, and then that lasted right up until I want to say high school. I was never super into Craig, even though as I got older he was kind of the James Bond, but
Right. From
I was always
2006.
really into 2006 was Casino Royale, and then I remember being in grade 9, and I think that was right before Skyfall was coming out, and I was like, well, I want to watch all of them, and so I went and I got the Bond 50 Blu-ray, which had all of them at the time, and
I've got it. Yep.
Watched all of them, and I'd seen most of them before, but there were a few in there that I was missing, and I can't actually remember the first time I watched On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but I do remember one time I was probably in middle school, and I saw it on New Year's Eve at the Tiff Bell Lightbox here in Toronto, so I got to see it in theaters, and that's
Now,
something
did
that
you
really stuck
seek
with
this
me.
out? So you're in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
It's New Year's Eve. Going to see a movie on New Year's Eve is, at least in my experience, is not like what your average middle schooler does.
Yeah.
Set that up for me. Was that something like you went out and saw it on your own? Did your parent
No, I think I went with my mom, and
Okay.
I can't remember what. I must have seen I think I was a TIFF member at the time, which I still am, but I think I must have gotten an email or seen some ad for it somewhere that they were playing this on New Year's Eve,
and that was the first time you remember seeing it.
Yeah, I know that I had seen it before. Like, it wasn't. I'd probably watched it
on TV or something
a year before that anyway, and had rented it or something. But so I definitely, it wasn't like it was a new experience for me then. But that's the time that I remember, that I most vividly remember seeing it. And
what did you think of it then?
Oh man, then it was really just it really, not to harp on the theatrical experience too much, because I think everyone
harp on it,
probably
baby.
that's listening,
Harp.
But I love just being able to watch something like that and have this the music booming at you, and just seeing it on a big screen. That ski chase is so. I just remember being so viscerally excited by that ski chase, despite the fact that this is not a new movie.
No.
And I was like, I think that was one of the first times, and I think one of the reasons that this is, without a doubt, one of my favorite Bond movies, is that it was the first time that I'd seen kind of the action of the older Bonds in a context where it made it really exciting and not sort of charming in that Austin Powers way, but actually like an engaging action scene that was like the ski chase, and that goes into the car chase, that the way that car chase is, and we'll
the
get into
ice
this,
driving.
of course. Yeah, and it's so exciting, and there's a lot of shaky cam and things that are sort of more modern techniques in terms of action that were utilized here, and where it's
that's awesome. So even as a kid, we're looking at like 2004-ish or so. Obviously, On Her Majesty's Secret Service didn't even have the best special effects in '69, right? No, nowhere near it's a
not a huge
low
budget.
Yeah, it's a pretty low budget film. They claim it was at about $7 million. So to see that in 2004 as a kid and still be pulled into that world, right, and still experience the all of those things as the filmmakers intended, that's impressive. Because
I don't think I had the words to really describe it at the time.
Sure.
But I just remember feeling like I had left a contemporary action movie, was that kind of into it. And I remember the audience reaction being generally the same. People loved
it,
really enjoying it.
I love that. And so then from that, do you think it was that experience then that kind of sealed this being one of your favorite Bond films? Or
oh yeah, definitely. I think it's the only one I've seen in theaters that wasn't out post me being born. Like I don't think I've ever seen another one in theaters. Despite the fact that they are pretty frequently re-released here, like they're usually kind of second run theaters will show them. It's not that uncommon. I just have never really gone, but yeah, like this one really always stuck with me. And there was also just this, I don't know why, this feeling of kind of coziness too. Like there's this Christmas kind of element to it.
All the snow,
that just is
Switzerland.
Nice and I think we both
there's
found
even
this
a
out
tree in
later
Blofeld's. There's even a Christmas tree.
Yeah,
in
there's the
Blofeld's,
presents. They give out the presents, right?
The bad guy there,
Yeah, and but we both talked about how we actually have both been to. I haven't been to Piz Gloria, and you have, but
I have.
We've both been to this area of Switzerland. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Like I've hiked a lot of the mountains that you can see from the windows of Piz Gloria and all that, and so yeah, there's a lot of. I don't want to say like super personal connections to the movie. It's not like I know anyone.
No, but
it's
a really wonderful memory.
But yeah, it's one of those. It's a movie that I can kind of put on, and it's like a comfort food. And I had been a few years since I'd watched it now, and I was really pleasantly surprised that this still holds up, because I actually have been watching a few of the Bond movies lately, and I rewatched one of my other ones that used to be a favorite of mine, The Living Daylights with Dalton, and it didn't live up. Still fun, like I still enjoyed it, but it definitely was not as enjoyable to me as it was when I was in grade 7 or whatever. That one I was worried that this one would kind of have the same impact, that I would be kind of less intrigued. But I actually found myself really, now that I'm at an age where I can kind of understand more about the techniques and the actual like craftsmanship of the film. I think that this one really held up in terms of its unique story style too. But I want to hear from you too about what was your first impression and things like that.
I don't have any recollection of watching this when I was young. Now, doesn't mean that I didn't, but because Bond films would have been on like Saturday. They would have been like a Saturday movie on the local TV station, which in my case would have been KPLR, Channel 11, St. Louis, Missouri.
K was east of the Mississippi, and
I think it's like, what is it, K and Q
and W
or something?
Or Q or something.
Yeah, who knows? But ours was KPLR. So for anybody out there who's listening who would be familiar with the St. Louis area, I've got them stuck in my mind. But so who knows? It might have been playing at some point on television. I might have watched it, but I have no recollection of this. Okay, and so when I was growing up, Roger Moore was what kind of represented James Bond to me. I didn't grow up with Connery, though of course, eventually, of course, I saw his James Bond. But Roger Moore was the guy who was doing the thing when I was a kid, and that was the first James Bond films I saw were the Roger Moore films, and then it might have been View to a Kill was the first James Bond movie I saw in a theater. Then of course they switched to Dalton, and I remember seeing his films in the theater. But I don't have a memory of seeing this film until I got the exact same box set that you referred to and started going through film by film by film and watching them in chronological order. I don't even know if because I really enjoy the films, but I am not like a James Bond scholar, right? I don't even know if I knew that Lazenby did Bond just this one film. I don't even know if I think that I thought that it just went from Connery to Moore, just boom.
Yeah.
So I was really taken aback when I first saw this film. And this isn't even that long ago. We're talking maybe 5 years ago or so I saw this film.
Suddenly some new guy.
For what right. And matter of fact, I literally remember I popped the disc in, and like the set, it just has like the name of the film. There's no like pictures or So I just pop in the disc, sit back, and I'm ready to watch the film. And it's like, wait a minute, this isn't Connery. Wait a minute, this isn't Roger Moore. What in the hell is going on here? And so it wasn't until I got to the commentary track, which I watched right after I watched the film, that I understood what was going on. But I was so for me, I was like totally taken aback. I was also extremely surprised about the fact that Bond here has like an actual relationship with a woman, actually gets married, and actually there's like a sad sad ending. Like he gets married, he's gonna live happily ever after with his wife, and she's killed.
Yeah,
like
it kind of it almost in a way sets up the Craig stuff, like
wow,
in terms of theme and stuff, right?
And in a way, it totally does. And so I was extremely impressed, to be honest. Having kind of seen it as part of this chronological viewing, like me, maybe I'd watch like one a week or something, right? So I had kind of gone through Dr. No, Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice. And, those are fun movies, but there's definitely some cheese in there.
Yeah.
And I felt like this movie felt more grounded than what had come before it in a lot of ways. And I still thought it was like really beautiful. I thought it carried over a lot of the look of those earlier films, which are really beautiful in my opinion. And we're going to talk about this, but you can tell there's some difference in the editing. There's some difference in and like I've already discussed in George's performance and the story that's covered here. But yeah, so that was the first time I'd seen it. So just 5 years ago. So it was actually pretty fresh to me. Yeah. So
well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned too like that it changes the kind of whole idea of like what a Bond structure is in the movie, and how there is this kind of 20-minute sequence in it where there's not really much action. It's just like them having this romance.
Yeah. Oh no, there's like a whole montage with a Louis Armstrong song, dude.
Yeah, and it's they don't use the song for the opening credits. They save the song for a montage in the middle, and there's also this really. I always like when so. For example, Sam Raimi's second Spider-Man movie does a similar thing where there's like a 45-minute section in the middle of the movie where he's not Spider. He loses his powers, and it's like this. There's the raindrops keep falling on my head montage, and he's just kind of a guy again, going through his day. And I always like that when these bigger sort of established movies where you have an expectation of what the structure will be, kind of play it a little bit differently for a bit. And I always liked that about this one, is that you have again this very quite endearing romance. Like I really like Diana Rigg. Well, I think Diana Rigg is great.
Yeah,
I probably had a crush on her as a kid.
I think like right off the bat, right? We open up and you notice a couple of things different right off the bat. We've got you have within the title sequence, which of course James Bond films are known for, and they were known for even by this film. You're known for their song and their title sequence that kicks off the film. So right here we have a title sequence that has imagery from the first 5 films.
Yeah.
And so, which I don't think had ever been done before. It hadn't recycled footage from previous films. So we're like, okay, this is like they're setting up something different here. And there's no lyrics in the title track. The title track is just an instrument.
Yeah, it's just the new
instrumental
theme song. Yeah,
it's just a new theme song, but it's not sung by anyone. It's not, they were performances by known people, right? And they would always incorporate the title of the film into the song. And it's my understanding that the reason they didn't do this on this film is that they couldn't figure out a way to have On Her Majesty's Secret Service be in the lyrics of a song and not have it be ridiculous.
Yeah, I think it was also because Dr. No opens, there's no theme song for Dr. No. It just opens with it's the same thing where it's because it's the first James Bond movie, so it's the opening credits to that one were also the instrumental James Bond theme.
Oh,
I think John Barry sort of wanted to make this the Lazenby Bond theme.
Yeah.
Because the original swing, surfer tune of James Bond with the guitar is only in this movie, I think like maybe once or twice. It's very, very sparingly used as the big action theme. Most of the music in this is the, what we think of as the On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme, which is the opening credits as well. So I think that might have been part of it too, is that John Barry kind of wanted to almost have this be like a fresh start.
A fresh start.
And start it in the same way.
And I love how they carry that right into the film opens. And we have this like driving sequence, and we have this really beautiful reveal of Bond.
This beautiful Aston Martin.
and it's, we have like these inserts of like, we have like behind, over the shoulder, we're like looking through the windshield as we're in the car driving with him, and we're along this beautiful coastline, and then we have like an insert. He like grabs a cigarette while he's like racing down the road and pops it in his mouth and lights it, and none of this we can't see anything but the guy's like chin, right? And I love how it's this slow reveal. It almost reminds me of like how Mad Max is revealed in the first Mad Max, where it's like it's like his actions behind the wheel of the car are kind of like what we see first, long before we actually see his face. I love that he's following this woman. He parks. He like, is he gonna kill her? He like opens the glove box, and there's like that, the gun that's in pieces that you could assemble. And he's like, whoa, is this like a target? But no, he like grabs the sight, and he like looks out at this woman who's like walking into the ocean. You're like, what's going on? It's like beautifully shot. It's great. I think it's just such a wonderful introduction to the new Bond. But
it
also
doesn't take itself super serious, like with the last line
it's fun.
when he's like, this doesn't happen to the other fella.
Well, that's sure, and so he's we don't know quite what's going on, but he runs out. It's like, looks like maybe this woman has run out into the ocean. We don't know if this is on purpose or what's going on. He runs out, grabs her, and then we have this great action sequence. Now I want to talk to you about that before we get to the little breaking of the fourth wall, which you jump to there. Because this is one of the first places where we see some new editing in the film. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. Now, obviously, this film existed in a different era than we're in now. But what are your thoughts on how the action sequences, specifically the fight sequences, are edited in this film? What are your thoughts on
It's fast. It's like I almost want to use the word experimental in a way, because it seems like they're trying this very, at the time, contemporary approach. And of course in Hollywood we have like the new Hollywood starting, and all these new editing styles that are very inspired from France and Italy and things like that.
Well, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was the #1 film of this year. So Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider, Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice,
The Graduate and all that.
That's where we're at.
And so I think that it's interesting though to me, because a lot of the choreography of the fight scenes is still that Connery era, where it's like, they just kind of throw each other into breakable chairs and stuff like that. But it's weird because it's kind of paired with this really dynamic
staccato. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's always fun to look back at these films and see where the art and where the craft has progressed, because, of course, nowadays we're used to, extremely specialized like stunt choreography with, just like ridiculously skilled stunt fighters or some actors, who are really trained. Like Keanu Reeves comes to mind, or maybe a Tom Cruise, people who do a lot of their fight stuff. But, for the past 20 plus years, I mean, we're used to wire work and a lot of martial arts incorporated into this stuff. And back then it's like, you've just got, like, I think Lazenby probably did all or most of his fight work himself. He's not trained in this. And so I feel like they had to do so much, they had to push so much with the editing. You get a lot of like undercranking to try to make things move faster. You get a lot of like really staccato cuts, jump cuts. You get
the very visceral sound effects.
You get these like over the top, Foley work where it's, I mean, they're just pushing, they just push. And it would be so fun to have kind of witnessed this film in its contemporary time. Because I do have to admit, kind of watching it now, it feels a little, it feels a little cheesy.
Yes.
And I, it's kind of like one of the complaints I have now. Let's be honest, though, in a lot of contemporary stuff now, which is especially true with television, less so with film. But this is very common with contemporary television, where they don't have a lot of time and they don't have a lot of budget, and they will just chop the hell out of a fight sequence so that they can hide the fact that, that this is not, they didn't have time to really choreograph something extraordinary. So it kind of feels like that's what you're seeing here in these fight sequences, in my opinion. But there is some interesting stuff. You even almost have like these interesting jumps in like in time and space that almost feels a little surreal. It almost, do you know what I'm talking about in this fight sequence where we're almost like, it gives the fights like a very surreal feel, you know?
Yeah, and it's almost, I think it's like it's this masking of what the actors were capable of and trying to make it
yeah.
this super spy, right? And
Yeah.
you know, even just like speeding elements up where
Yeah.
you know where there's a punch, it'll go double
Yeah.
speed for a second, so it looks like it's a harder hit.
And zoom in and like push in
Yeah.
real hard or like pull out real hard and
yeah, I mean, again, this movie didn't have a huge budget, and I don't think any of them really did it until like the later Roger Moore era. And I think
this
what's
is one of the
fascinating about that
smaller
though is that you get so much of that, like what kind of Austin Powers made fun of, which is this very B movie feeling. Of like, these aren't B movies, but there's a lot of elements of, and you know, because it was really, they were kind of independently financed, and so I also think it's unique because you go from, again, this like massive volcano layer in You Only Live Twice, which also wasn't a hugely budgeted movie, but there was an incredible set, that Blofeld layer at the end. But you go from that to a real location on this Swiss mountain that they actually shot in, that wasn't built for the film, that, you know. So I think it's very fascinating that this movie feels a lot more grounded to me. And I know the director, Peter Hunt, specified that he wanted everything to feel like, he didn't want it to feel lit, and he wanted it to feel natural. He wanted the sets to feel real and things like that, not like it was studio. And so he intentionally, I think, put ceilings on all the sets that were built. So that
is correct. Everything has
they
ceilings.
couldn't like studio light it and just make everything really bright, so that the cinematographer had to sort of work around that in light in a more modern contemporary way. Because most of the time these days, unless you're shooting like a big, you know, soundstage, most sets do have ceilings, because a lot of times things are shot on location in a house or something, right? And so you wind up with this very interesting look of the film, you know, and I think the cinematography is beautiful in it. It's shot anamorphic. There's a lot more dynamic camera movement than perhaps, you know, if you look back at Dr. No, a lot of it's pretty, like, you know, staying in sort of wide shots with, again, just kind of flat studio lighting, and whereas you get this one kind of becoming a little bit more dynamic with transitions, and you know, just even the way that, like, you'll have a moment where somebody's in complete shadow talking when Bond goes in and finds the Irma, or whatever her name is, the angry German lady in the bed, when she's pretending to be one of the women. And he goes in, and it's this really like moody lighting, and he's kind of lit in silhouette, and then he lifts her up, and she lands right in this light perfectly, and of course reveals herself. So there's a lot of really interesting choices that I think kind of went on to. I don't think this movie necessarily was the epitome of what the 70s looked like, but you can sort of see how they're trying to land in this more naturalistic style, as opposed to a more formalist style of the earlier 60s that was kind of going out of favor at this point.
Well, even just really within these films, these films, I mean, you know, you can see where this film is kind of in a shift, in the middle of a shift, where you know, there are definitely setups here that look like they could have been pulled from any one of the earlier films. But then you're right, there are moments where, especially in the action, where we feel like this film is starting to take a transition, which of course this was like a huge period of transition in cinema, you know, period as a whole. But I want to go back, because you mentioned, and I think this is really fun, you mentioned at the end of the beach fight sequence in this first whole kind of setup here in the beginning of the film, where we're introduced to the new Bond, where, you know, he beats everybody up, he saves the girl, and he kind of like has this, it's totally fourth wall breaking moment where he literally looks at the audience and it's like, this wouldn't have happened to the other guy. And then we cut right into the title into the credit sequence.
Because of course Tracy runs away and
that
steals his car.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was like such a risk, frankly. And I mean, you would never see that kind of thing happen in a Craig Bond or whoever's going to be the next Bond.
You know what's interesting about it though? and I don't think that I almost don't believe this, but the screenwriter says that the reason that was in the movie was because he was making a reference to Cinderella because he's got the shoe. And he's like, well, this never happened to the prince, because the lady runs away and he's holding the shoe. I don't believe that, though. I think it was very much a tongue-in-cheek nod to Craig or to Connery.
To Connery. I mean, look, it works both ways. It works both ways, but it's like such a cheeky, like tongue-in-cheek, like nod to the audience and not, you know.
Yeah, because he's supposed to be the same character technically. But I love that. Yeah, I just like, well, like you said, this would never. And that's what I mean when I say that the movies today, not just the Bond movies, but film in general, is so self-serious.
Yeah.
That it's really interesting to look even just at like the wider level of franchise that, you have these elements that are just, like you can play with continuity. You can kind of have these little nods to the fact that, this is a little bit silly that suddenly this new character, or this new actor is playing the same character. And
it's
the fact
fun.
that Telly Savalas and Lazenby's characters, Bond and Blofeld, met each other in the last movie, and they don't know, like, for some reason in this one, they have no idea who each other are, right? Like, there's no, like, they don't mention the fact that they just had a big fight at the end of the last movie. But I like that, like, I think these days, you look at the Marvel movies, and it's like, God, I can't imagine a headache of writing one of those movies and being like, well, we have to make sure that this doesn't conflict with anything that's happened in the last 28 movies we've done.
Right.
Like, what a headache that would probably be.
Yeah.
And yet, and it's the same thing for Bond movies, though, right? I think one of the big reasons I haven't really enjoyed a lot of the Craig ones, with exception to Casino Royale,
they're so serious,
was that, it's like I found that I was really looking forward to No Time to Die, because I was like, oh, this one looks like it's actually going to be kind of fun and exciting. And I saw it and I was like, God, why is it got to be so serious? Why
heavy.
Why can't they just have a little bit of fun with them? And I hope that they go back to that for the next ones, because
they won't.
That's why I love Brosnan's, is because Brosnan has the Brosnan action scenes in at least GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. I think that they're really, really well done and exciting action scenes and things like that, and they feel very contemporary in that way, where it's like the action's not dated, it's exciting, it's really well done, and yet at the same time, the movies do have a laugh occasionally at what they're doing, like at how ridiculous these scenarios are, and that would never happen today. Like you'd never, there's almost even a joke in Tomorrow Never Dies about the fact that the villain, his plan is just absurdly complicated and stupid, and they're like, you really expect this to work, kind of thing, and that's the joke, is that this villain has this very, very stupid plan to get like exclusive broadcasting rights in China, but you would never have that these days. These days, is you've got to have like Christoph Waltz having murdered Bond's brother when they were children or something, and here's the thing is that it's personal and it's family,
it's still as cheesy as ever, though. I mean,
and again, but unintentionally now, right?
But
like it's almost
but it's still as cheesy as ever. But they're like, it's like they're so they're so serious though, that they're like kind of unwilling to kind of play with that anymore, I think. I mean, okay, now maybe we're going to get off we're going to digress, or just take a second. Which Bond film was the one where they're like, the bad guy is like injecting them with something, or like, wasn't there like, it was one of the more recent ones, and like, oh gosh, which one was it? Where like the bad guy was like injecting them with like some kind of...
Oh, is Daniel Craig like strapped into a chair? And
yes.
Like a needle going. That was Spectre. I think that was the one before.
I was like, this is the most ridiculous crap I have ever seen.
And he's got like a big desert base. Yeah.
This is so goofy, but it was like played so serious that I was almost just like, come on, you gotta have like a little bit more.
Well, and that's and I think that this is an important conversation to have in the context of this movie. So I don't think we're digressing too much. But it comes back to this idea of like, and I know the Craig movies were pretty critically successful, with, I think, exception of Spectre and Quantum of Solace didn't do too well, but so clearly there's something that people like about them, which I'm not going to fault anyone for if they like that. But I find the same issue with like the Nolan Batman movies, where they're trying to sort of have their cake and eat it too in building this really realistic, grounded, gritty, world. Like, oh, this
Right.
takes place in the real world where like real world things happen and cybersecurity and all these threats. But at the same time, you're making a movie about a secret agent that's like sleeping with women and drinking martinis and going around the world and shooting and blowing up factories and stuff. And it's like I found that same thing with the Nolan Batman movies, where I was kind of like, you can't have a movie that's this gritty crime drama taking place in they're essentially trying to make Chicago or something, and about the mob and all this, and then you also have a dude in a bat costume flying around, right? Like, you kind of have to. You can do it in a grounded way, but you kind of have to lean into the cheesiness a little bit to do it.
Sometimes.
And I think that Dalton, and I think that Brosnan, and I think Moore really went for the comedy, but I think that Dalton and Brosnan especially kind of hit this pretty good balance between, there's grittiness and it's a bit darker and it's a bit more real and a bit more violent and a bit more, like you can really feel the punches
but it's
and
all
there's blood
with the
when
wink.
people get shot, and yet at the same time they're kind of still living in this heightened reality of supervillains and funny stuff, right?
It's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's like, there's like it's kind of like not taking yourself too seriously. And I think that's probably the best way to, and I'm sure the pendulum will swing in another direction at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's been, I think we had kind of like the like pinnacle of kind of slapsticky almost, even with Roger Moore. And kind
definitely.
of like that. And
Where
then
there's
that
like a slide whistle when they do a car jump, and
right, and
like
then that kind of we've been going away from that ever since, with Timothy Dalton, Pierce Bronson, and then of course like really hitting its apex with Daniel Craig, right, where it's like they're really trying to make this like dark and grit, like all the things you just described. And I think at a certain point it'll kind of come back in another direction. It's just there has to be some kind of dynamic to it, and this is the direction it's been going for a while. I'm sure it'll swing back, but I do find that this film hits a pretty good balance of those things. And I also, we haven't talked about it a ton specifically, but Lazenby's performance, I mean, I think his performance is actually quite good. In contemporary reviews, neither his performance or the film was reviewed well, and it's hard to know if a lot of that was just because people didn't like change. They like Sean Connery a lot. Now we've got a James Bond that's not Sean Connery. This is sometimes jarring. It's hard to kind of process.
Whereas it's now, of course, the new Bond thing is what
now
is
it's
the
understood.
big excitement, right?
Now it's part of the series, right? We've gone through enough Bonds. Everybody understands that an actor plays Bond for 5 or 6 films, and we get a new Bond. That's how it goes. But he was the first, so people only knew Bond as Sean Connery. So it's going to be jarring. It's going to be shocking. We have like first-time director Peter R. Hunt. He had done a lot of editing work. And that might actually like kind of show itself in some of this editing that we've been talking about, especially in the fight sequences. But he'd done a lot of editing, but this is his first film. And, maybe this is why they got a little less budget. We talked about that. But it wasn't very well critically reviewed. Now, commercially, it's not that it like tanked, but it wasn't as successful as some of the previous. I think 82 million off of the 7 million budget in its day. But and I just like right after we have the sequence on the beach, we for the most part we jump to Bond returning to London. He's at his office, and I feel like this is good. I feel like Lazenby did such a great job. There's this beautiful exchange with Moneypenny. And there's this whole kind of running joke where they flirt with each other. And I feel like this was one of the better exchanges I've seen in the films, especially up to date. I felt like it was like tonally perfect. It was fun. And I feel like there are a lot of moments in this film where Lazenby does a really good job with these kind of things. I think he does a great job with his relationship with Diana Rigg's character. I mean, how did you feel about that?
No, I've always liked Lazenby a lot.
Yeah.
And I think as a kid, I always thought I wouldn't before I'd seen this, because I remember, other friends who were into like they always just kind of knew this one as like, oh, that's the one with the guy who's not very good. Like, and I think everyone sort of expects that because he only did one, but he chose to not come back. He wasn't fired. But I think that
he's
yeah, no,
Australian. That might
Yeah.
throw off, and that might have thrown off some
I think that
people,
even like he
you know?
doesn't sound. I mean, he does a good job with the accent and things like that. And
No,
he
he
doesn't sound
does.
like he's not like Crocodile Dundee. Or
But I
anything.
just mean you think about it, right? You're British,
Mm-hmm.
and James Bond is your. This is your man. Like,
Yeah,
if
well, I
you're-
remember it being a big deal when Brosnan was because he's Irish, right? And so,
Yeah.
so people were almost like angry.
I don't know.
People always get. I mean, the British tabloids are always so silly about those things, but no, I
mean,
think
I guess to be fair, I mean Connery's Scottish, but obviously
Yes, yeah.
that's still British Isles. But
yes, he is.
but yeah,
But
I
no,
think,
I think that I know I liked. I mean, but I remember always thinking that Lazenby does a good job. I thought that I think Rigg does a fantastic job. I think that the Peter Hunt also. I'm surprised that he wasn't asked to do more Bond movies. I mean, I guess the critical.
I think he did
reception
second
probably-
unit stuff on the following film. Yeah, but he
Yeah,
wasn't,
yeah, but he did more directing also after of other things,
but
he,
never Bond.
Yeah, but I think that it's like when he makes a lot of these decisions in it that are very fascinating to me that wind up really great. Like again, also choosing to shoot a lot of the interiors of Piz Gloria in the actual location. So you get that like beautiful when the helicopters are coming to rescue Tracy, and you've got the sun rising, and you've got this amazing shot of Telly Savalas, who's also fantastic. Like he's without a doubt my favorite.
Yeah.
Blofeld. But
I mean,
but
I
when you
love
look out the
Pleasance,
window and he like kind of walks over the window and there's this flare, this like anamorphic lens flare coming through from the sun, and you can see the helicopters approaching, and it looks like in that moment something out of a contemporary movie almost, just because of how back then oftentimes an interior location would just be a set with like a rear screen projection or a matte painting behind it or something like that. Like they wouldn't want to actually shoot the interiors of a location on location because the windows would be the light would change and things like that. So but that's also, again, to go back to our conversation before, where you get into this sort of New Hollywood style, right? Where that's what New Hollywood was authentic, was using natural light to shoot, was, getting out of this studio formalistic mode and kind of using what's available and making things look a little bit more grounded and real. And so I think that also really works, is that you don't have this big volcano layer. You don't have this super villain with I mean, of course, he's got a little bit of a ridiculous plan of
but speaking of
blowing up
grounded,
the world's
though,
crops or whatever. But
but speaking of grounded, I mean, having like your lair at the top of the Swiss mountain with 12 young women
at an allergy center or whatever they call it, right?
for an allergy research institute.
Yeah.
I mean, like for all of its groundedness that we're talking about here, I mean, it still has trademark Bond.
Oh
goofiness.
yes, yeah. It's just in comparison to like a volcano layer, right? It's like,
But I love
this is
this.
just a real location on top of a mountain that
But I
actually
love this
exists,
whole thing. I love this whole thing. I mean, I have to admit, I was like a little confused with the whole like, how did Bond get there with this whole like, what was this
Where
weird
he's
like
faking
Blofeld's
Sir Hilary Bray.
like like Blofeld is trying to like he's trying to like get some kind of title or something, and
Yeah, he's trying to assume the title of like the French side of his family,
right,
so that
and
he can continue doing crime without being known as Blofeld, basically.
and so he's right, and so he's like trying to lay claim to this title of royalty, and so he's he's like some, I don't even know what the position is called, but some kind of like, what would you call this, genealogy specialist or something?
Yeah, like I guess someone that has to administer the title and make sure that it's legitimate and all that.
Right. So Blofeld wants to like verify his title, and so Bond assumes a fake identity of the person who's going to go out there to certify or verify Blofeld's title. Okay,
Yeah.
like wow, for an American, this stuff is like it's not like immediately obvious like what all this stuff is, because we're not used to titles and all this other stuff. So I had to like rewind it for a second. I'm like, wait a minute, I got lost in this for a second. So 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 I love that setup. And then we've got, Lazenby flies. I mean, he goes all the way out to this like a lair that's out in the middle of nowhere in the Swiss mountains to do this thing for Blofeld. And I love that he shows up and he's being shown. Oh, and he gets picked up at the train station. And you'd mentioned her.
Was it Hilda or something? Yeah.
Yeah, the woman who is like basically, I guess, Blofeld's right hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like beautifully played by the actress who plays, and I think is it Elsie Steppet, I think is the actress's, yeah, and which is like perfect casting. I mean, she's fantastic in this, and I just love how we kind of are introduced to the lair, and we kind of see you've got the James Bond touches where he's like locked in his room, you have to press a button to get out, all this kind of thing. And like you said, they use the set, or a lot of it, which is really quite wonderful. But he's like got his kilt on, and we meet the 12 women there that are like supposedly being treated for their allergies, right? And it's like Blofeld's Angels of Death. Of course, we don't know this yet, but we do know this because we know where it's going to go in some way or another. But I love that like they're different like nationality. Like each one of these women is from a different part of the world. And they've got all their allergies, and we have this like, some of the women are kind of flirting with Bond, in his assumed,
hilly
fake identity. Yeah. And I love that when they sit down to dinner, like each one of them, like, is only eating the thing that they were supposedly allergic to. So it's like one of them has just like a plate of chicken. Another one has like just a plate of potatoes or whatever it was.
Yeah. No, that's hilarious.
I'm just cracking up. I'm like, but the costuming is so beautiful. All the actresses are really
super
wonderful.
60s, like late 60s. And,
yeah. I mean, you can like you had mentioned Austin Powers. I'm like, this is like he must have gotten so much inspiration for that film from this one scene alone.
Yeah.
I just love that the one woman takes her lipstick and writes
her room number.
Room number on his inner thigh under his kilt. I'm like, ooh, risque.
Yeah.
But I love that, and it's just like and I feel like everybody there seems to be having fun. Like the actress, like especially that main Angel of Death, the one woman who writes on his thigh. I just feel like they're having fun, and it's like totally really enjoyable right now. It's like I feel like everybody kind of knows it's ridiculous, but it's a movie and we're allowed to be ridiculous and it's fun,
Yeah.
And then I think this is what you were talking about is really quite interesting where we're then, so they do their whole thing and Bond ends up going to her room later on in the evening. And that's when we as an audience realize that in the evenings, these women are being programmed with subliminal messages from Blofeld. And part of that is that the ceiling is this like
lights,
wall of like rainbow kind of psychedelic lights. And so you're right. It's this really beautiful, sets up this really beautiful shots. They do this a couple times where he's kind of silhouetted in front of that. And we have Blofeld's voice recording coming through. We've got this really beautiful kind of psychedelic lights. And I'm like, yeah, man, this is like Bond of the 60s,
Yeah, the Beatles wrote this, yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's extremely fun. And like you said, I've been to the Piz Gloria, and it really is an extraordinary location. It must have been an absolute nightmare to shoot there.
Oh yeah, everything would probably have to be helicoptered up.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, no, they probably shot.
No, that's actually quite a popular shooting location for both Bond and I know another. I think Spectre was also shot there. And,
really?
Not at that exact location, but in that area, the
around there,
area.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the Phantom Thread as well. I hiked up to the hotel that Phantom Thread is. So it's actually quite a popular. I think because the Swiss have just like engineered the hell out of those mountains, and
that's what they do.
So much infrastructure that it's easier than shooting in anywhere else. But Not anywhere else, but any other mountains.
Yeah.
But no, I love Telly Savalas, the way that
Let's
Telly
talk about
Savalas-
Telly. I want to talk
the
about
way that
Telly.
he holds the cigarette in this movie. Whenever he's smoking one, he kind of holds it like it's like a wand almost. Like he has this weird underhand smoking technique.
Yep,
and I
yep.
have always used that whenever I've been in a movie or a short film or like a play where I had to smoke a cigarette. I have always held it.
I love it.
I don't know why. It's just
No,
like,
I know why.
adopted it
I
from
know
Telly.
why. Because it's awesome. I mean,
it looks cool as hell.
I was just watching. I was just watching a film of Telly's, Sonny and Jed, which is a spaghetti western. Are you familiar with Sonny and
Yes.
Jed? It's a Corbucci film. Telly's fantastic in that film. He's my favorite performance in that film. And honestly, every time I see him, I so thoroughly enjoy him. I have got to make it a point. I'm going to go look at his filmography and add the films that he's been in I have not seen yet to my watch list, because every time I enjoy his performance.
He's always so good. He's definitely one of,
He's fantastic. I mean,
I think he's such a great Blofeld, so different. Like he very clearly just kind of, I don't know if this was a mix of his and the director's decision, but completely throwing out the Donald Pleasance role, which wasn't bad. I like Donald Pleasance in the role.
I like him too, yeah.
But having no interest in trying to do an impersonation of him,
Which
and
you
just
have
saying
to,
like
yeah.
I'm
You have
just
to make
gonna
it your
turn.
own.
Yeah, and it's so
You know what
good,
it
and
is?
it works
I think
so well.
it's earlobe acting.
Yes,
I mean, once you tack up the earlobes, man. I mean, all like that's what they teach you. I don't know if if you studied acting, but that's it's
impressions
acting.
a specific muscle behind the ears, and yeah.
But I mean, I think he's fun. I mean, I think. I want to talk, because we talk about there are definitely like some B film kind of feels to this film in some places. I'm curious I think you mentioned that you noticed this too in some parts, and I think it's interesting to see and take for granted that today, if you have any issues, and you're sitting in post and you have some issues with some takes or things aren't lining up or whatever. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but a lot of times you have options to fix so many more things in post now with CGI that we just take for granted now. Even simple stuff. I mean, just you and I as like really low budget independent filmmakers, we've got After Effects. I mean, there's so many things.
I can paint a boom out of a shot or whatever. Yeah.
And it really is quite simple and looks quite good. But in these films, obviously, this is not an option, and you can see, and it's just fun for me to kind of see this, where there's like jump cuts where there was no reason for a jump cut to exist unless there was some kind of mistake they were covering up. A few I noticed was the like, for example, when there was like an insert shot of the coat of arms when we were talking about the whole genealogy royalty thing. There's a jump cut there that I have there's no reason for it to exist. There's like, it's an insert. We see the coat of arms. There's like a set of hands holding it, and we just have this jump cut. It makes me wonder, like, I wonder what happened. Like, why did they have to splice two takes for some reason? They didn't have enough footage, or something got damaged, or who knows. There's like interesting cuts. There's like a wacky dissolve cut with near the end of the film where there's helicopters hovering over Blofeld's lair that just like doesn't exactly line up. So the helicopters just kind of like
dissolve into place,
and then like dissolve into another helicopter like 2 feet away from it.
Yeah.
And it just makes me wonder, just from the just loving to know more about the mechanics of filmmaking. This isn't me knocking the film, but when I see those things, it always makes me wonder what happened. What's the story behind that? What, why did they have to take those steps to do it? I would imagine that an audience back then probably would never even had noticed, and maybe most audiences even wouldn't notice even today because they are really minor. Did you notice any others? Those are the two that really stood out to me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. During the skiing sequence, a lot of the times when someone like falls or something, it just kind of cuts to someone not moving instead of showing a crash and things like that.
There was a lot of that. Yeah, I mean,
yes,
in general, you'll see, and this is where I think you start to see some of the lack of budget come into play, right? Where you'll have the setup of some kind of thing, and then we just cut to like it's. we're missing the impact, right? Because they couldn't show it, because they
like a fight where you have a shot of someone winding up a punch, and then it'll cut really quickly to them having already extended their fist, and
like they're
the guy
already
falling over.
They're like already. It's like wait a minute, we're missing like the actual the
impact,
the key part of that. Yeah, the impact part of that, and we know why, right? It's like they're having to hide the fact that they can't actually be doing these things, but. But I think, but overall though, I mean, and we touched on it a little bit, I really enjoyed the action sequences. And I think my favorite was the ice racing where I love the fact that, that they actually had real cars on a real ice track. And as somebody who's kind of a car fan, I just love, I mean, it was a mixture of really fun action, but actually kind of goofy slapstick. You've got this Mercury Cougar, much larger car than most of the other European cars on that track. Yeah. You've got all these little Mini Coopers, and you've got this big Ford. And I love that they're on actual ice. And it was like bumper cars. They would bing, and a little mini would go flying off. It was almost
spinning out.
It was almost like Mario Kart is actually what it made me think of. I'm like, this is almost like Mario Kart. But you could tell it was real. You could tell they didn't fake the ice. It was real cars, and I thought it was actually really well shot, really fun to watch. The skiing footage, a lot of that I felt like was, especially the actual real footage, aerial photography of real skiers, I thought was amazing. Sadly, and I think it's a good microcosm of what we're talking about here, you have these really extravagant, beautiful shots kind of juxtaposed with really not great rear projection.
The rear projection during the skiing especially is not particularly
and I get
great.
It. I get it. That was the technology of the time, so I'm not knocking the filmmakers at all. But I think, if you look at the height of special effects, which this is a yardstick that frankly some current films don't meet. In 69 you had the height of that technology would have been 2001 Kubrick's film. Now, but to try to compare almost any film to that is just not fair. But that gives you kind of that was the pinnacle, the zenith of special effects at that time.
Yeah, and Planet of the Apes had been out too and things like that.
Yeah, obviously this does not meet that level.
Well, then that was one thing too I wanted to discuss about when did James Bond sort of become this prestige action franchise, where it never really was up until, again, I want to say the end of Dalton, because I sort of mentioned that before, where Dalton sort of began this, not him himself, but his movies sort of began this phase of I guess it was a little bit with Moore too, because Moonraker was definitely kind of riding on the success of Star Wars, but Dalton with Dalton it really Living Daylights is very much Raiders. They're very much responding to the success of Indiana Jones, and then License to Kill is very much responding to Miami Vice. That is literally Bond versus cartels in Miami.
I hadn't thought of that. Yes, I see this.
And so it's they almost started looking at these more not necessarily more successful, but these really popular elements of media at the time and going with them. Brosnan sort of brought it back. I don't think that there's very many explicit references to other media or homages in Brosnan's work, but they are very much these really high budget, prestige, well made.
I mean, you're talking $100 million plus budgets.
And then with Craig, it really Brosnan became obvious when Craig took over, and it was very much a response to Bourne. The Bourne movies had come out, and everyone wanted these really realistic, bloody, knuckle beating assassin kind of spy movies, and Craig fell into that role. So it's interesting that you kind of have this evolution, where it's again, the earlier Bond movies weren't necessarily B movies. They had budgets, but they were these kind of independently financed, goofy, especially with Moore, fell into a lot of slapstick comedy, sort of and then suddenly there were these prestige things, right?
The first three Bond films did. So Dr. No had a budget of $1.1 million.
Yes, but yeah.
And even adjusted, I mean, that's maybe $8 or $9 million ish, maybe
Yeah,
10 today.
yeah.
That's a minuscule budget. From Russia with Love was 2 million. Goldfinger was 3 million. So it's
Yeah.
not until you get to Thunderball that you're even. I mean, that was 6.8. You're talking really low
Yeah.
budget films, and you're right. They were basically independently financed. But you do see. I mean, it was. I feel like, kind of like Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, like those were big films as far as box office goes. I mean, those were huge in the late 70s, but they still
And you started
had
getting sort of
pretty
this
small
celebrity
budgets.
too, right? Like where
Yeah.
like Christopher Walken is the bad guy in A View to a Kill,
Right.
and Grace Jones is the henchman. And, you really started to see, and who is it? Who's the bad guy in License to Kill? He's
License to Kill.
is
I'd have to.
well, I've got him here.
Was it Robert
no,
Davey?
Yeah, and Benicio del Toro's in it. He's not the bad guy, but Robert Davey is Sanchez. So you started
Yeah.
to sort of see these like actors that would go on to really have these huge careers. Benicio del Toro obviously is a huge actor today.
Yeah, I had forgotten he was in that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting though that you kind of have this transition from like in perhaps I guess the late 70s into the 80s where Bond became this very sort of prestigious, like you think about how
Well, it's a brand. It's a big
huge
brand.
is it to get the song, like to be an
Yeah.
artist and get the Bond song, or
Yeah.
a director, like there's so much fanfare about who's directing the next one, who's going to be the next
It's
Bond.
a big machine. It's a big machine, which scares
yeah.
me. Which scares me
Yes,
because it scares me because, and again, we're not to beat a dead horse, but on those earlier films and the one we're talking about right now included, I feel like there was space to have fun in it and to be tongue in cheek and to be
and
a
a
little
sense of
goofy.
personality and
Right, and all of that kind of adds up to exactly that there was a sense of personality to it, right? And this is where I'm a little bit with all of Danielle Craig's films. I wonder if the box is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and especially if we look at the trends in cinema and especially Hollywood today, which is trying to replicate over and over and over the success of the previous film in the franchise and being more and more afraid to take any risks outside of that. I mean, it's a giant machine now. I mean, here we have a series of films that have been going since 1962. They now we're talking, I don't know about global box office, but I'm guessing that almost every, or maybe every one of Craig's films probably nabbed $1 billion-ish. Globally.
I think Skyfall was the first one to pass it, but they all made at least to high hundreds of millions. Yeah.
100. I mean, at least. And I don't know, domestic versus global, but it's a big brand. It's a huge brand, and the marketing and they sell everything off, right? Like what kind of car he drives is sold to the highest bidder. What kind of watch he wears is sold to the highest bidder. Yeah. Like what kind of phone, right? What kind of phone he uses? What kind of suit he wears? I mean, it's insane. It's a giant machine. Yeah. So I'll be curious to see kind of where it goes next. Now, have you heard?
I don't know, but it's what's interesting to me about that too, and not to digress too much as we
digress away.
Just
digress away.
I want to compare it very briefly to like Mission Impossible, because that's another big spy franchise at this point.
Right.
And my favorite Mission Impossible movie is the De Palma one. I think that's, to me, it's the only one that's like really a very, very good, fun,
good film. Yeah, it's actually good film, yeah.
But I know that the recent ones, like since Ghost Protocol, which was kind of the reboot, I think that was the fourth one that came out, they've been getting they've been having a lot of critical success, and a lot of people talk about how
they make a ton of money,
good they are. And I find it interesting, though, because all everyone ever really talks about those is like, what is the new like gimmicky stunt in them? Like, is he climbing the... But I was talking to a friend about this the other night where I was like, I don't think I can remember who the bad guy is in the last like 3 of those, and I've seen them all.
I have no idea
what the plot is in any of them. And so it's interesting that if there's one thing that I'll say about these old Bond movies, it's like I always do remember the villain. They always have very memorable. Maybe I'm not going to remember their convoluted plans. As like I don't think I remembered what Blofeld's specific plan was before watching this, but I remember Telly Savalas for sure. I remember the vague idea of what happens in this kind of like I could tell you a pretty good recollection of what the movie's about. And so I think it's interesting that nowadays these things are moving into, and I find this with the modern Bond movies too, where I can't. I almost like, I know that Christoph Waltz was the bad guy in Spectre, but what was he doing? I know he played Blofeld. Like that's the big reveal, is that he's secretly Blofeld.
And he's a great actor. And it's not like he's not a great actor.
I actually predicted that. Another digression. I when I was in grade 10, I made a fake. One of my assignments in a class was to make a fake James Bond movie, DVD case, and I made one with Christoph Waltz playing Blofeld, and it was like all about Spectre and stuff like that, and coming back, and then like a year later,
I spoofed Skyfall, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like I back when Skyfall was like fresh, when it was like just released, I made one of my good friends and I shot a fun little, 5, 6
Sky Mall, right?
Well, it is funny. We shot a spoof called Sky Mall, where James Bond's budget has been slashed. And so Q says, the only thing we have budget for is, here's a Sky Mall catalog. You got to pick something out of here to complete our next mission. And so he does, and wackiness ensues. But actually, we actually got Sky Mall used that for some of their promotions. They actually paid me. Like I don't know how they even found. I don't even know how they found it. But they actually paid me a little bit to use that short film, parts of it, in a promotion that they were doing at the time.
That's good.
But I'll say this: it was really fun to do. But I'll say this: I've learned a lot about filmmaking since then. But I am still extremely proud of the parody song that we actually completely re-recorded, which is at my YouTube channel. But we actually completely, my friend and partner who worked with me on that Sky Mall short is also a musician, has a lot of musician friends. They actually got studio time. We wrote like all new lyrics and completely re-recorded that Adele theme song for Skyfall. And I'm super proud of that, actually.
Yeah, well, that's actually funny because I guess when I was in grade 9, I had written this trilogy of James Bond movies that were probably all 20 minutes or so. And I remember buying the rights to this. Someone had made this James Bond song to like try and get it to be the next song on YouTube to hope that Eon would buy the
little self-promotion
thing.
Sure.
And I remember contacting the person and sort of saying, can I use your song in my James Bond movie? And I never finished it, but I remember I did pay them for the rights, and I wasn't very much. I think I paid them like $100 or something. I was
that's funny.
Broke high schooler at the time, but
maybe you should go back.
I wrote these very detailed scripts about. I could probably still have them somewhere, but yeah,
I'm surprised there aren't more satires and parodies of the series. All right,
I think Austin Powers probably kind of closed the door on that.
Closed the door on that. Yeah, it's like boom. What else is there to parody? Yeah. Well. This is a blast, man. It's fun to go back. This is I think an underappreciated film, at least by many people. And it wasn't a film that would have jumped out at me as one to discuss, but I've really enjoyed it. And hey, everybody out there, I mean, even if you're not a Bond fan, I think the movie stands on its own. I think it's a really fun time capsule of its era. I think it's still.
It almost
really
makes more sense if you watch it on your own versus like coming out of You Only Live Twice, because
honestly,
there's a lot of incongruencies.
I think you're right. Yeah, if you just kind of watch this standalone on your own, I think that you'll be better off. But yeah, it's a wonderful film, and it was a blast to watch, and it was a blast to talk about. And I hope our listeners out there enjoyed hearing us blab on and on about it.
Yes.
Well, it looks like I have a decision to make. What film will I choose? I don't know yet.
Your decision.
We'll find out.
Should you
we'll
choose
find
to
out
accept it.
We'll find out in a couple weeks. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful couple weeks. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.